Now on BBC News, the biggest African and international news stories. Focus on Africa.
Coming to you live from Nairobi, this is Focus on Africa on BBC News. Our top stories: another sign of increasing tension between Niger and Benin as Benin says it will block oil exports from its neighbor. Authorities in Malawi drop corruption charges against the country's vice president 18 months after he was arrested. And a race to find survivors after a building collapsed in the South African city of George. 21 people have been pulled out of the rubble, but around 50 remain unaccounted for. And also in the program, he's an Olympic champion and one of Kenya's greatest ever athletes. Eliud Kipchoge tells us how he feared for his family's safety after becoming the victim of an online hate campaign.
I had 3 days to just not sleep, day and night. I don't know where to sleep when.
Many thanks for joining us on Focus on Africa. I'm Rhoda, Odhiambo. We begin in Benin, where authorities there have blocked Niger from exporting oil into the country. The two nations inaugurated the estimated $6 billion pipeline connecting Niger's oil fields to a port in Benin last year. It was intended to allow Niger's oil to be sold on the international market for the first time, but since then, the relationship between the two neighbors has soured. After Niger's military coup in July last year, Benin, an ECOWAS member, closed its border with Niger in line with sanctions imposed on the junta that overthrew President Mohamed Bazoum. However, Nigerian authorities kept their side of that particular border closed, citing security concerns. Now, the move is likely to escalate already existing tensions that began after a military coup in Niger last year. The almost 2,000-kilometer-long pipeline connects the Agadem Rift Basin to Port Seme Terminal in the Republic of Benin. The completion of the pipeline was a milestone and was expected to transport 90,000 barrels of oil per day. Now, earlier I spoke to Teniola Tayo, who's a trade and policy expert in West Africa, on the impact Benin's move will have on relations between the two countries.
So I think at the center of all of this is really what's interest at stake and who has higher bargaining powers. At the time that Benin shut its borders with Niger, it was regarded as a punitive measure against Niger, against their trade. But then Benin quickly reopened the border when they realized that it was hurting their own trade operations, because it was hurting the finances of their port operations. So in other words, it was in their interest to reopen. Niger recognized this and did not reciprocate the reopening at that time. But with this most recent move, there's a question of whether the relations will become normalized, because now you have economic interests colliding both on the Nigerian side and on the Beninois side.
What was the relationship between these two countries before the sanctions were imposed on Niger, given that most of the sanctions that were imposed by ECOWAS and neighboring countries were aimed at ensuring that the military returns the country back to civilian rule? There's
been an era of mistrust, really, especially after the military cooperation agreement between the two countries was cancelled last year. That was September last year. And again, this was in response to what the Nigerian side described as a show of force by the Beninois military at the border region, so the region of Gaia. In fact, the Nigerian military deployed to Gaia when they saw that Beninois soldiers were also beginning to be stationed there, just to reassure Nigerians that were living in the region. So there's been lots of mistrust. You know, there's even a history of tensions at that same region in the 60s when there was a dispute with the Ete Islands and other related matters. So now it's been in Benin's interest to play nice, as they say, but we'll see how the Nigerians respond with this latest move.
Is that border between Nigeria and Niger still closed?
Nigeria reopened its borders with Niger some months ago, but in this case, Niger did reopen its borders with Nigeria not too long ago, about in March of this year. So they opened the borders in the regions of Difa, Tahua, Maradi, and Dosso. But even as they reopened the borders, they also ordered the strengthening of security along the borders again because of this previous threat of an ECOWAS invasion.
And if we look at the overall impact of the decision by Niger to keep its borders with its neighbors closed, did it have any impact across the region?
When you talk about trade, because that's what borders are primarily for the movement of people and of goods, it would have hurt Niger's economy one way or the other, whether particularly the cross-border economy. So you have these people, the informal traders sometimes that, get their daily wages or their daily living from moving goods across the border, even in an informal way. So those people were certainly hurt, and their accounts are very well documented to show that. And with the overall perspective, especially with this oil pipelines now that are at risk, there are some concerns that it might be significantly impactful for Niger's economy. So we'll see how they try to address these border relations and the border closures.
Before the coup in July, Benin Corridor had handled up to 80% of Niger's freight. What alternatives does Niger have right now?
Between Niamey and the port of Cotonou is about 1,000 kilometers. And if you look at the map, similarly from Niamey to the port in Lomé, it's around 1,100 kilometers. Of course, passing through Burkina Faso, which is Burkina Faso being a friendly country to Niger. In fact, already in a regional group that they formed, the AES. And we know that Togo has been, more of an amenable partner or stakeholder with the junta, even helping to broker the ECOWAS talks, and even sometimes helping to advocate on behalf of the Nigerian government, promising that, they were going to publish a timeline for returning to democracy. So that might be an option for them. It's a bit of a longer route, but then it's through, relatively friendly territory, and then it still gives them access to the sea.
To Malawi now, where a court has dropped corruption charges against Vice President Saulos Chilima after the state prosecutor filed a notice for the case to be discontinued. Mr. Chilima had been accused of taking a bribe from a British businessman in order to influence a contract which both parties denied. So why were the charges dropped, and what does that say about President Lazarus Chakwera's pledge to make fighting corruption a key priority? Well, I spoke to Willie Kambwandira, the Executive Director of Center for Social Accountability and Transparency in Malawi, who gave me his reaction to the ruling.
Yeah, I think in the first place, let me start by saying that we are very disturbed that after taking such a too long and taxpayers' money was used, the case can be discontinued ceremoniously. One, this doesn't demonstrate prudent use of taxpayers' money. But again, I think it doesn't also demonstrate our commitment as a country in as far as fighting corruption. There were all strategies and tactics to make sure that this case, just like has been with other cases, die a natural death.
You've talked about that this not being the first time, and there have been several high-profile cases where people who've been accused of alleged corruption, their cases have been discontinued. Why has that been a precedence for so long that has been set by the office of the DPP?
Yeah, I think sadly there is no transparency and accountability from the office of the Director of Public Prosecutions. We haven't been told the grounds and reasons why these cases are being discontinued. So that raises a lot of speculations. That raises accountability questions that we have an institution on the land that can willy-nilly decide to discontinue high-profile corruption cases without any explanation to Malawians. So these are some of the questions that are also bothering us as the civil society organizations, as citizens in Malawi.
And what's been the general reaction by Malawians to this particular news?
Yeah, generally there is a lot of discontent among Malawians because the picture that we are getting now is that we have a certain section of individuals in the country who are immune to accountability, who can be arrested on corruption allegations, but they can walk away with it. While those in the communities, while people who steal chickens, they rot in jail. So honestly, this doesn't send a good message out there. It smacks of selective prosecution of corruption cases. It smells of rent-seeking among politicians and senior government officials.
So if we look at the country's laws,
yes,
if corruption cases are discontinued, or if any cases are discontinued by the office of the DPP, he is supposed to give valid reasons as to why. Now, if we look at this particular case against Mr. Chilima, the judge ordered that the DPP give a report to Parliament within 10 days as to why the case was discontinued. What is the probability of the DPP being able to say why the case was discontinued?
The probability are very minimal, considering that these decisions have been made in secrecy. There is lack of transparency in as far as these decisions are being made. But like I said, our interest is not on whether the DPP is going to tell us the grounds or not, but our take is that this is gross abuse of the office of the Director of Public Prosecution. And it is our major view that this office now is under heavy political capture, which is now doing a disservice to Malawians in general.
That's Willie Kambwandira giving us an update on the case of the Vice President that has just been continued in Malawi. And here's what's still to come on the program. We'll be live in South Africa's Western Cape as rescue teams search for survivors after a 5-story building collapsed. Welcome back to Focus on Africa. Rescue teams in South Africa say they're in contact with 11 of the construction workers trapped under a building that collapsed in the city of George in the Western Cape. It was last night when the 5-story apartment building, still being built, came down with floors collapsing on top of each other. Rescuers today are concentrating on areas where they've heard calls for help. So far, 21 people have been dug out alive. 6 people are dead. Around 50 remain unaccounted for. It's thought the search will take several days. President Cyril Ramaphosa has called for an investigation into the collapsed building. Let's now speak to our Africa correspondent, Shingai Nyoka, who joins us live from the city of George. Shingai, thanks for joining us on the program. What's the latest update on this rescue efforts taking place there?
Well, as you can see, Rhoda, the rescue efforts are continuing almost as vigorously as they've been during the course of the day as well as yesterday. They're now entering their second year, but many of the rescuers are still on site. You'll be able to hear some of the noise in the background. There are people, rescuers, that are congregated around a particular area where we believe that they found somebody, because we heard some cheers earlier on. To the left of me, we can see cranes, heavy-duty cranes, which have been doing some of the heavy lifting, lifting some of those concrete slabs that you can see in the background, that were potentially concealing people. And so that's really how they've been progressing during the course of the day, focusing on the areas where they believe that they've heard people calling out, as one local authority said earlier on today.
We're in contact with 11 people. We have one area where 4 people are in a basement, and we've been communicating with them, so that's quite a big operation. It'll take them most of the day to get them out. What we are doing today is the international standard is 3 days of rescue mode. So in other words, we treat everybody as still alive, and we try and rescue everybody. So that's what we'll do.
And Shingai, did the local authorities in Western Cape be able to say what are some of the challenges that rescuers are facing in trying to get those that are still stuck under the rubble?
Well, the major challenge, as you've heard there, is the race against time. Specifically when it comes to this building. This was an apartment building, a 5-story apartment building that was still under construction. And so the problem really has been trying to get through the reinforced concrete. That's what has caused the delays. But we've also been speaking to a lot of family members who have been camped out here for days, hoping and expecting that the rescuers will bring their relatives out alive. Some of them say that they are still in contact with their relatives beneath the rubble, that they are cold, that it's dark under there. One of them told us that his son is pinned underneath some of the blocks there. And so there really is an expectation and a hope that tonight some of those that are trapped under there will be brought out alive.
Other than calling for an investigation, what else has President Cyril been able to say about the collapsed building?
Well, he offered his condolences to the families of those who have been affected by this. Many of those families, as we've been finding out, are not just South African, but they come from across the region. But I think the major issue, which has really been reinforced by the local authorities, is that they want an investigation into this. They want to understand what exactly happened. Building collapses like this are rare in South Africa, especially in areas like this. And we've seen a lot of disbelief and shock from many of the people that are waiting outside this cordoned area. But a lot of people really want to understand what exactly happened for a disaster of this scale to happen.
That's the BBC's Africa correspondent Shingai Nyoka giving us an update on the collapsed building in the city of George in South Africa. Now, he is considered the greatest marathon runner of all time. Kenya's Eliud Kipchoge will attempt to make history in Paris in a few months by becoming the first marathoner to win 3 Olympic gold medals. Yet the 39-year-old has told the BBC that he feared for the lives of his family during a campaign of online abuse that wrongly linked him to the death of fellow Kenyan marathon runner, that's the late Kelvin Kiptum, in February. In a candid interview at his home in Eldoret here in Kenya, Kipchoge explained to Sport Africa's Celestine Karone how the threats turned his life upside down.
What happened actually has given me at that high not to trust anybody, even my own actually shadow, not trust.
A 2-time Olympic champion, Eliud Kipchoge is one of athletics' most decorated stars.
This was my second gold medal in marathon.
During his career, he has become accustomed to criticism, but he says the 12th of February this year was the worst day of his life. That was the day Kelvin Kiptum lost his life in a tragic car crash. Just 24, he burst onto the scene almost from nowhere, and it looked set to challenge Kipchoge's dominance in the marathon, having already broken his compatriot's world record months before his death.
I was shocked that the all people online, all social media platforms are saying that Eliud is involved actually in the death of this boy. So that was my worst news ever in my life. I received a lot of bad things that they will ban the camp, they will ban my investments in town, they will ban my house, they will ban the family.
Were you at any time in that period concerned about the safety of your children? Did you fear for your family?
Absolutely, yes. I started to call a lot of people to see whether people are safe. But my worst moment was I tried to call my mom, and I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I don't know. He told me that just take care, and you know, a lot has been going on. She gave me courage, and I said it's okay.
Kipchoge told me the fact that the abuse was online made it difficult for him to report to the authorities that his life was in danger. The four-time London Marathon champion also says the bullying from his community and some of those closest to him broke his trust in human nature.
It was really painful for me to learn even from my own people, that my training mates, those who actually I have contact with them. The bad words are coming from them, and you know, I was really down to see that.
Did you lose any friends like in this process?
I lost all of them.
Kipchoge's team took action to protect him, blocking him for a month from his account on X, the platform he says contained the most abuse. While he still believes social media can be a force for good when used well, he also wants the main platforms to do more to tackle the problem.
I think they should actually act fast, get the facts, delete accounts for the people actually to know that if you say something which is not good, then your account will be deleted.
X says they prohibit behavior that harasses, shames and degrades others, and recommend users contact law enforcement if they feel a credible threat to personal safety. Just weeks after Kiptum's death, the abuse impacted Kipchoge's performance. 10th place in March's Tokyo Marathon was his worst ever finish in a marathon.
When I was in Tokyo, I had 3 days which I did not sleep, day and night. I don't know where the sleep went, but I did not sleep.
Kipchoge is hoping to win a third successive Olympic title in Paris this year. Organizers in Paris say they will use artificial intelligence to combat online abuse during the Games.
They are now stamping their authority and their function actually as an organization handling the athletes to safeguard them from the abuse. I give them a plus.
The race to protect more than 10,000 athletes in Paris is likely to be long and difficult.
This is the honor from the government of Kenya.
But the personal impact of online abuse on one of Kenya's greatest ever medal winners proves why it needs to be won.
And Celestine is with me now in studio. Celeste, thanks for joining us on the program. This is the first time that the Kenyan athlete has spoken out about what had happened to him. How was he when you did the interview with him?
Well, Rhoda, you know, we are so used to this Eliud Kipchoge, the athlete we know, who's synonymous with no human is limited. There's always this aura around him of invincibility. But when I was doing that interview, he was very vulnerable, you know, and it showed how this issue really affected him. I've never seen Eliud Kipchoge very emotional about anything, and I've covered him in 2 decades. So it really did hurt him very deeply. And I guess it also just showed us that, you see, we may see him as this man who, the first person to run under 2 hours, but he is human after all. And, you know, maybe that gives people pause whenever you think about when you post something online and what it can do to a human being. I
mean, whatever he went through has taken a huge toll on him and even his family. Has he been able to seek professional help, for instance?
So Eliud said he did not go the route of seeking professional help, but he had support around him in terms of people he could speak to navigate this with them. And he says that has been very important, you know, from his own family, his wife, and then he had also his management team. And he says there were some other, members of the community, senior members of the community, who reached out to him and helped him navigate this. And he said, at the end of the day, he felt like, well, there's nothing he can do about people saying things about him online. He said he's a bit used to it. And so that is the way he navigated this issue.
And he's also preparing to go for the Olympics in France. And we know that as a sports journalist, it's not only the physical strength that matters, but also the emotional and the mental health. So how has he been able to cope in preparation for that particular marathon, looking at all these things in totality?
So for Eliud, he's usually very big on being mentally stable. And that's why he talks about how when he ran the Tokyo Marathon, he was unable to really compete at optimum because mentally he was not there. He'd not slept for days. So he says what he has done is since he came back, he's been healing. He says he's feeling like he's been healing. He says after the Tokyo Marathon, he spent 4 days in Tokyo. He met with different people. He interacted, and he felt like he had a renewing of the spirit. So he says that he continues to read books that uplift him. He continues to talk to people who encourage him, and that way he heals his mental state. And so it allows him to be able to give his all in training. And he says he will be extremely ready for the Olympics as he chases history.
All right, thank you so much, Celestine Karone. And well, that's all the time we had for you on today's program. Feel free to get in touch with me and some of the team on social media. I'm on X at Odhiambo Rhoda, and don't forget to tag at BBC Africa. You can also listen to the Focus on Africa podcast from wherever you get your podcast from. That's the Focus on Africa podcast. And you can also read up on the top stories here in Africa. Just log on to the BBC Focus on BBC website /Africa. Well, that's it from me today. See you tomorrow.